Greetings, this is Bruce Morton and welcome to Cancer Interviews. Our guest on this episode is Stephanie Smith of Montpelier, the capital of the gorgeous state of Vermont. She has survived breast cancer, but a key component of her journey is being diagnosed at age 29 and how her being diagnosed at that age affected her life during and away from treatment. Now it's time to hear her story. And Stephanie, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, the first thing we want to do is the first thing we do with all of our interviews, and that's to learn a little bit more about our guest and their life away from cancer. So if you would, Stephanie, please tell us about where you're from and what you do for a living, and when time allows for fun, what you do for fun.
Great. So I'm originally a Green Bay, Wisconsin native. So I live in Montpelier, Vermont now, where I've been here about 10 years, moved in 2013. And we moved out here. My husband and I finished grad school in Chicago and moved out here to take jobs and to live in a place where we have a lot of access to the outdoors. So we like to play outside. We've been doing a lot of skiing this winter, cross-country skiing this winter mostly, and just love living in this absolutely wonderful place. For work, I work for the state. I do projects and planning, predominantly around reducing flood risk in the state. So upsizing culverts, doing property buyouts, that sort of thing. So really trying to reduce our impacts that we're seeing from climate change in Vermont when things are getting a lot wetter and our rivers are a lot more volatile than they used to be. And I also, last but not least, have a almost 4-year-old, as he tells me. He keeps telling me he's almost 4. It'll be a couple of weeks, who takes up any and all remaining energy and time.
Okay, now we're confident you'll be able to learn some tips and tools during our interview with Stephanie to help you through your personal cancer journey. But first, we'd like to invite you to please give us a like, leave a comment or review below, and share this story with your friends. Kindly click on the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so you'll be notified when we release our next cancer interview. And if you or a loved one are facing a cancer diagnosis, please click on the link in the description and show notes below to check out our free guide, The Top 10 Things I Wish I Knew When I First Got Cancer. Now, Stephanie, it's also our custom to learn about the juncture in your life when you initially noticed something wasn't quite abnormal. But in your case, it sounds like making such a determination to learn something wrong was especially difficult. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is fair to say. Yep, absolutely.
And could you describe just what was determined and what made it more difficult?
Yeah, so I was, one of the things that made it more difficult is definitely my age. So I found my cancer myself. I was in the shower and I noticed something a little weird and thought, I better talk to someone about this. And I was late in my pregnancy with my now almost 4-year-old. At the time, I was a couple weeks away from having him. And so I was seeing an OB every week at that point, I think. So I went in and I showed it to her, and she also thought maybe something was there. So she sent me in for an ultrasound. It was solid. So they wanted to do a further assessment and do a biopsy and see what was going on. And when I got to the surgeon, and I'm like 36, 37 weeks pregnant at this point, he almost didn't do the biopsy because I was so young. He was 99% sure it was nothing. And he was worried about any potential complications from hitting a milk duct while doing the biopsy because I was so close to giving birth. And I said, well, I'm here, let's just do it, because I didn't want to have to be thinking about it. But I heard later from the OB who delivered my son that he wasn't going to do it. So it would have, if I hadn't pushed for him to do it, we wouldn't have found it.
Which brings up a topic that sometimes comes up in our interviews, and it's very important. We can't bring it up too often. In that situation, Stephanie, you rose to the occasion as an advocate for yourself. How important is that?
It's huge. It's unbelievably important. And in that moment, I didn't feel like I was advocating for myself, like he really wasn't going to do it. It felt like he was just giving me that as an option. And I was like, well, I'm here, let's do it. But then he had a follow-up conversation with my OB afterwards and told her that he wasn't going to do it. And I think, I really hope that reframes how he thinks about these things and that he doesn't have that hesitation going forward. Because he was saying, well, let's wait until maybe you're done breastfeeding and then you can come back. And I'm thinking, I'm going to breastfeed my baby for a year or more. Like that could be a really long time from now. And my tumor was already 4 centimeters. That would have been very bad news for me to wait for another year.
Stephanie, it's never a good time to be told that you have cancer. We know that is obvious, but the magnitude of the cancer and the makeup of the individual who's been diagnosed, that is its own equation, those variables. So against that backdrop, already knowing that this was terrible news, how did you react? How did you handle it when you found out that A, you were pregnant, and B, you'd just been diagnosed?
Yeah, it's one of those things where looking back on it feels like so much was happening so fast that I didn't really start processing any of it until I finished treatment, which was 9 months later, right? So I'm all of these things are going on in my head at this point, but I think in some way when I look back at that moment of the surgeon calling me and saying you have cancer, it's almost like watching it happen to somebody else in my head because I wasn't really processing. I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't know what treatment was going to look like. I didn't know any of the things that would come next at that point. And the other weird thing, the way that I think about it is when someone calls you and says you have cancer, your entire world comes to a screeching halt. But it's so strange to think about how no one else's did in that moment. Like everything is still moving around you. The world is still moving. And so I got up the next morning and it was a Wednesday and I went to work because I had a meeting and I had emails and I had things to do. And I remember thinking like, what a strange idea. Like I just found out I have cancer and I just got up the next morning and went to work because I had things to do. Right. And I think there's this, people don't know how they'll react in that moment, obviously, because they've never experienced it, but it felt like this sort of out-of-body experience to continue living my life when I just had this huge boulder dropped on top of me.
Stephanie, each type of cancer is a bit different. And when one is diagnosed with some cancers, you have only one option. There's just one thing you can do to treat your diagnosis. With other cancers, there can be a whole range of treatment options. In your case, did you have options? And once you were presented with them, if you did have options, what option did you choose?
Yeah, so I had a couple of options. For the most part, it was a pretty prescribed standard treatment approach. So because my cancer was big and because I was young, I talked with my doctor about doing chemotherapy first so we could see what that did to the cancer before doing surgery. So that was one of the choices to the order of operations functionally. But my chemo looked like one set of chemo for 4 rounds every other week, and then a different type of chemo for 4 rounds every other week after that. And sometimes they do that in 3-week intervals, but I was on the, you're young, we want this to be gone, let's hit it as hard as we possibly can track for treatment. So I went through the chemo, I had surgery, and then went through radiation after that.
Chemo is never easy, but again, it can be different, the experience, depending upon the person and their own variables. How tough was chemo for you?
Yeah, so the first 4 treatments were a lot harder than the second 4 treatments. So my last couple of treatments, when I was starting to recover from that first 4, were a lot better. I think part of the hardest part about it is the mental, like going back to chemo every Thursday, knowing how I'm going to feel Thursday night, how I'm going to feel Friday, how I'm going to feel Saturday, and then just slowly over the course of 2 weeks, getting my energy back just to do it again. And the mental load of that was really hard for me. But I knew when my bad days would be. So I knew on Saturday I would feel really terrible for the entire day. And then I'd wake up Sunday and feel a little bit better and start getting to feel like myself again before doing it all over again.
Many people who go through chemo experience certain cognitive setbacks. Was that a problem for you? The term that is used sometimes is chemo brain.
I think it was. I think what I have a really hard time separating out is the having a baby and going through cancer treatment, because I did them at the exact same time. So I think hormonally everything was crazy from both of those experiences. And people talk about having a baby and having your mental faculties challenged then too. So I think it's hard to tell what was cancer and what was brand new mom. But yes, I definitely felt like it was a lot harder for me to retain things, and maybe still is a little bit compared to before.
during that time when you had two mammoth tasks to simultaneously juggle, who provided support for you? Who or what?
Yes, there's three humans that I'll credit for the majority of my support during this experience, in no priority order, but my husband was a huge source of strength and stability for me, and I don't give him enough credit for that. So definitely want to bring him up, and just thinking about like having to go through all of this with me, but just watching it happen to me and not being able to do anything about it, but being there through every single step. So he was a huge support for me in that moment. Oddly enough, I think when people hear about my story, the idea of having a newborn baby and going through chemo at the same time sounds and is terrible, but I think my son was he was just this bright, shining light in all of this that made it so much easier to focus on something that wasn't my cancer. So I credit him in a lot of ways for how well my chemo worked, because I couldn't just wallow in a corner somewhere. I had this thing that was 100% dependent on me, who I had to keep alive and happy and focus on him. So he was a huge source of light and joy through that entire experience. And even just being able to bring him into the cancer center a couple of times. He came with me for my last 2 rounds of chemo, and just to see everyone's face light up, I feel like I've improved the energy in this space a little bit by having this baby here today. Was really wonderful to see. And then my mom. So my mom still lives in Green Bay, which is halfway across the country from here. I was absolutely terrified to tell her, because I didn't know what she was going to say or how it was going to hit her when I was diagnosed. And the first thing she said was, "Okay, so you're going to be going through treatment. What do you need? Like, when do you want me to come out?" And she moved in with us for 4 months. She left her entire life. She left the job that she was doing at the time. And she came in and lived with us and helped take care of me and the baby and get through everything. So those were definitely the three biggest sources of support during all of this.
I cannot imagine how mentally daunting that would be, to try to bring a child into the world and deal with cancer. Did you find that you had resources that you didn't know you had?
I did, and there were other people that stepped up too. Obviously, like I had coworkers bringing me food. I had a coworker and a friend who had recently had a baby, dropping off breast milk. She added a pumping session so that she could bring me breast milk, which is like, I don't think I've adequately thanked her for that. That's such a huge, monumental thing to do for somebody else, which I was so incredibly grateful for. And I think when you go through something like this, there are a lot of people that come out of the woodwork in that way. Like, some people don't know what to say, or they don't know what to do, but a lot of people will step up and support you in a way that you didn't know they would have done, which was wonderful.
Now, we've talked about the support piece in this, and we've talked about your age and how those two things came together. Did you find that seeking external support outside of your husband, your son, and your mother, did that become more difficult because you were 29 instead of, say, 59?
I think for me, the part that became more difficult was when I finished treatment. I'm a planner by training. My brain works in how do I structure things? What's the plan? And all through treatment, I was living very much in the moment. Like, okay, here's the next thing I have to do. Here's the next thing I have to do after that. Okay, and then this. But there was a plan, and it made sense, right? And then it did feel a little bit like I was dropped off a ledge at the end of treatment. And I think the part of the trick is that everyone, if you're lucky enough to have an end date on your treatment, which is not always the case for people who have cancer, but if you're lucky enough to have that, my experience, and in talking to some other young people as well, is that that's day one when you finish treatment. That's when you really start to process everything that you've been through. And it's also when a lot of that support goes away. So I think for a lot of people, that's when I needed support the most, was when I finished treatment and I was trying to figure out, what does this look like for me? How does this change my life? Now I have to still do these scans. I still have to meet with my doctors every few months. There's a lot still happening. I still have to think about this all the time. But for everyone else, they're just so incredibly grateful that it's over, that they just want to move on and they don't want to talk about it anymore. And I'm just at the beginning of processing it at that point.
Now, there is a cancer support group with whom you have gotten some support and you are affiliated with to an extent, and that's the Vermont Cancer Support Network. Could you address what VCSN has done for you and what it can do for others?
Yeah, so it's a really great organization, and I think part of my interest in wanting to join the board of this organization was trying to figure out it was part of that, trying to figure out what happens next in life and how do I take this experience and support other people that are going through something similar. So we do a couple of things in the organization. We have a program that connects survivors with people who are currently going through cancer, which was something else that was huge for me. I met someone during my treatment who was young, also had breast cancer, was going through chemo at the same time as me, and it was huge just to have that connection. So it's helping facilitate some of those connections.
And is there a group within VCSN where people who are diagnosed with cancer, be it breast cancer or other cancers, but they're diagnosed at a younger age, where they can go and feel some alignment with other people who have been diagnosed at a young age?
Yeah, so we can do that direct connection approach with people who are younger. I think part of me wanting to join the board is to increase that. So to say cancer isn't just for people in their 70s. Sometimes people are 29 and they have cancer. And so I think my intention with being there is to help ground the organization in a new population, not entirely, but not to shift focus completely, but to include a younger population in who we serve more directly.
Our guest is Stephanie Smith of Montpelier, Vermont, and she was diagnosed with breast cancer at age 29 when she was pregnant. Stephanie, along the lines of Vermont Cancer Support Network connecting with people who are younger, if you would, if somebody listening right now is age 25 or 29, if you would give an example of how VCSN can target or specifically help someone who is younger in a way that they wouldn't do for somebody who is age 65.
Well, I will tell you, if you are young and if you go to the VCSN website and you shoot them an email and say you want to talk to me, they will connect you with me. And I'd be more than happy to chat with you and hear your story and support you in any way that I could. That's one of the biggest pieces, is making that connection. I think there's more that we can do, and I'm trying to figure out what that is in terms of support groups. So I think my hope is that we're able to reach that type of audience in a broader way in the future.
And if somebody wanted to shoot you an email at Vermont Cancer Support Network, what is the address?
So it's VCSN. Now I want to make sure I get it right. I will find that for you while we keep talking.
Okay. Now, let's get back to your journey, and I want to get to perhaps the most pleasant part of it, and that is when you felt like there was some metaphoric light at the end of the tunnel. When did you sense that things were getting better as far as your journey was concerned?
Yeah, so the email address, just to get that out for a second, is info@vcsn.net.
Okay, one more time, info@vcsn.net. Now, again, to your journey, when did you feel like things were getting better?
I think part of in how I process this, part of the challenge with when I really knew how things were getting better is that it sort of hits you in waves, right? So after I finished my chemo, I had surgery and I was told I had a complete response to the chemotherapy. They didn't find any invasive cancer at that point, which was very good news. That was one of the best moments of this entire journey. And I think from there, like, finishing treatment felt like it was supposed to be this really big deal. It felt a little anticlimactic for me, but then it's sort of, as you get further away from it feels like there's more time between thinking about it, or more time between being stressed about it. And now I'm almost 4 years out from my diagnosis date, and everything has been good. So when you can have those scans and you can have those moments of seeing, okay, they did a scan, they didn't see anything, that's a really powerful moment.
And if you think about the outdoorsy stuff you do that is so important, How close are you to 100%? In other words, if pre-diagnosis was 100% physically in terms of able to be able to do the stuff you like, how close are you to 100%?
I think I'm close. I think I'm probably at a 90, and it's also hard to tell because I was 29 then, I'm 33 now. There's changes that, I'm getting older. And I also had a baby at the same time. So like my ability to do cardio was definitely decreased from that, and also chemo. And it's just a lot of things to hit you at once. So it's hard to separate those out. But I think for the most part, it feels like I'm back. Like it feels like I can do the things that I could have done before.
Wonderful. Stephanie, we're going to wrap things up now. And whenever we wrap things up, we start from kind of the same place, and we like to end from pretty much the same place. And that is, if you encountered somebody face-to-face, one-on-one, somebody who had just been diagnosed with breast cancer, and here they are in their 20s, as you were, you, I suspect, would have a lot of things to say to them. But if you could think of one overarching point of the message that you would like to get across to that person, what would it be?
I think one of the things that would have been really helpful for me to hear, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself when I was diagnosed. And it would have been really helpful for someone to say, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to have moments when things are hard. And then you get to move past those and experience other things in life. But I think that would be what I would tell them.
Wonderful. Stephanie, and before we go, again, we want to get out that email address if somebody wants to contact you, Stephanie Smith with the Vermont Cancer Support Network, and the address is info@vcsn.net. Stephanie, that's going to wrap things up. We appreciate your sharing your story with us, and I suspect there are a number of women who hear this, and it will be either a source of inspiration or information or both. So thanks very much for an eloquent account of your journey, your story. Thanks very much for being with us on Cancer Interviews.
Thank you, Bruce. Have a great day.
You too. And that's going to wrap things up for this edition of Cancer Interviews. We want to remind you that there are plenty of people out there like Stephanie who have a story and information to tell you, and when they speak, you should listen. So until next time, we'll see you on down the road.